Morning to you. We'll start the meeting, then we'll go straight into the agenda. First item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9. Did somebody move the true record?
Oh.
Thanks for that. On then to a bit of a mess here.
Sorry, Leader. If
you needed to. Yes. Apologise for that, Linda.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, the declarations of interest, which we usually do at the front. I've had some discussions, and there'll be two interests, Leader. As you know, you'll be declaring a prejudicial interest on item 6 for the council tax base because of the discount on second homes. So you will leave, and I think the Deputy Leader will chair just for that item. And Councillor Clark, as Council appointed Governor for Crossy-Cailog, I know you'll want to declare personal interest on item 8, but you can stay for that one. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Leader.
Thanks for that, Linda. Sorry I forgot. Now then on to attendance. There's a sheet going around. I think, I'm assuming that David Daniels, have anybody ever received an apologies for David Daniels? Is he? Well, we'll see. He's not present anyway. And then declaration of interest. Linda's just done that. Minutes of the meeting, which we've just done. Action sheet, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Leader. The action sheet's there for information unless members have any questions.
Right, thanks for that. Then the next item I must leave, and the Deputy Leader will take over.
Right. One out, one in. Okay, agenda item 6 then, call on Nigel.
Okay, this is the report you get every year at this time of year that just formally sets the council tax base. The base is there in 4.7, shows a slight increase over 2016-17. In terms of the key messages, we're keeping the collection rate assumption as it was last year, 99%. Even I can't assume 100% collection rate. We've increased by 182 properties. We're going to continue to apply a 0% discount for classes A and B, and that was a nice ringtone. And continue to apply a 0% discount for prescribed classes C, and we're going to use the electronic supply of information to go out with the to go out alongside the bills rather than paper as we did last year. The only point I want to bring out in the report, in terms of the detail, is in 4.11. This time last year we changed the discount rate to 0%. That's for those properties that have been empty for over 6 months, and you can see there the numbers in terms of the ones we're exempting have fallen, which means we've brought a number of homes back into beneficial use. In 4.9, the sentence that starts such long-term employees currently receive 50%. That's an error in the report. That line should be struck out. In terms of the recommendations, is to approve the tax base for the year, and to approve that we continue to apply a 0% discount for prescribed classes A, B, and C, and that we'll have the information electronically rather than paper.
Right, does anyone have any questions for Nigel on this report? No, I'd like to support the report, especially the points mentioned in 3.1. I think the 0% discounts are right, certainly at the time. The 99% collection rate was something that we rightly increased in previous years, but as Nigel said, it's not really an option to increase it any further. And the decision to supply information electronically is one that saves time, cost, and saves paper as well. So that's something I'd support, and I'd move the report. Everyone in favour? Anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you.
Would you, Nigel?
Okay. I'll do the majority of the report, but a bit of a double act. Lynn is going to present the feedback from scrutiny of the budget proposals, which I think is then a strength in that we're bringing the scrutiny activity together and reporting it to Cabinet. In terms of the background, members will be, more than familiar with the background to the report, so I'm not going to bring out anything specific in that, other than to say, in terms of 4.4 and the emerging corporate plan in the new year, that needs to start, crystallising itself at pace in readiness for finally settling the budget and financial plan and corporate plan as part of a suite of reports on the 1st of March. Moving then into the national considerations, obviously we had the Chancellor's spending review announcement last week, and whilst it's obviously dire for the public sector, in terms of in Wales, I make the point that I was expecting when I wrote the report that the Welsh Government budget would be broadly cash flat, and I think that is being borne out. The Finance Minister said last week that they're looking at a further real times reduction of 3.9% by 2019-20, which is certainly not as significant as some of the headlines were announcing. So therefore, as I say every time, it will be the decisions that are made by the Welsh Government that will really affect what we in local government get in Wales. I then make the point that it would be hoped that if Welsh Government are keen to protect health, that some of that resource should also be used to support social care, because obviously all the evidence is that investment in preventative stuff within social care does help the health service budget. I make the final point at the end of 5.1. There's an awful lot of talk about learning from England, which is relevant, and we do try to do. But it implies the system in England is working and is sustainable, and I think there's a lot of evidence that the system in England now is starting to creak, and the cuts are having a big impact, and particularly the interrelationship between social care and health in England. So. If we're going to do something different in Wales, I would like to see them protect some element of social care alongside health. In 5.2, I talk about the timetable, and I think the thing to say there is it's going to be late. We're going to get the provisional settlement next week. Usually I've had the provisional settlement in October. That's as a result of the spending review. Everything is then pushed back, but I do make the point that while some authorities in Wales are thinking of pushing their budgets to the 10th, the final day you can set it, my personal opinion is we stick with the 1st of March, and we put the risks of that within our report, because essentially if the Welsh Government budget gets delayed for any reason, we've still got to settle ours. And as members know, we are building our planning assumptions based on an expected reduction of -4%. Obviously, once we know the position next week, we can firm up on that. Section 6 is about updating on the financial challenge and meeting the financial challenge. We obviously set our MTFP, and those figures are within the report in March, and we've changed it as a result of pay. We're now modelling on -1% pay, and some of the assumptions in future years around increased pension fund employer contributions. So we've adjusted that. All services, we've got full estimates for all services for 16-17, so obviously we replaced the forecast for 16-17 with estimate pressures, and they moved marginally. So you're left with, in 6.3, a challenge of nearly 26 million. What is not within the within that table is any allowance at the moment for the national living wage, whether that applies within the social care setting or for our own staff, although we're working and modelling those sums up, and they will become part of the financial challenge however they are addressed. Then in terms of meeting the financial challenge, I've made the point to members several times that we need to do this based on a 3 years. This year, just salami slicing and just looking at 1 year is not sustainable. All services put forward savings to balance with a reduction of up to 10%, with the exception of social care, which was 2%. So that was part of your budget planning guidelines. As we're moving down into the report in terms of 6.7, these are the protections I've been asked to model within the current modelling, protecting schools at a cash flat line and not reducing for falling rolls. We raised that with the School Budget Forum last Friday, and they asked us to pass on the recognition to the Council for that protection at this stage in the budget. I've been asked to model a cash reduction for neighbourhood services, those parts that are within your corporate plan priority around greening and cleaning at 2% and maintaining the social care protection at 2%. Those protections only a framework at the moment. You're not making any decisions yet, and whilst they're challenging for those service areas, they will be less over the 3 years than for all the other service areas. 6.8 you've had before, members, in terms of the corporate stuff that we're looking in terms of modelling to try and make the position for services better. The most significant one is the new operating model and looking to remove duplication across the council by doing business in a different way. The table then in 6.9 tries to bring all that together, and it follows a logical path showing those protections. The most pertinent bit to bring out for members, if all of that works, we achieve all the corporate things we're trying to do, and the operating model yields the savings we're talking about of £1 million over 2 years. With those protections I've been asked to model, if it does come out the Welsh Government reduction, as I expect, we're looking at minus 3.5% for all other services, 16, 17, 4.5%, and then 7% respectively. And bearing in mind, scrutiny considered up to 10% from all of those areas. So, if our assumptions are right, then we've got some choices, and that's what scrutiny was all about. Of course, with the Welsh Government, I could be wrong, but I hope not. Especially now that they're on a cash flat line, hopefully they'll make some choices. In terms of scrutiny, Lynn's going to take you through now the outcome from scrutiny, and I'll come back in after that.
Thank you. Councillor Mandy Owen chaired the meeting yesterday, but unfortunately she can't make the meeting today, so I'm feeding back on behalf of scrutiny members. So, as Nigel has indicated, and as you are aware, scrutiny members were presented with all the savings proposals over the next 3 years. So they were looking at over 200 proposals. Because of that, 2 workshops were held for scrutiny members to explore the implications and the impact with chief officers. And yesterday, scrutiny members came together in a formal committee to formulate a set of recommendations for consideration for Cabinet around which savings they feel they're able to support at the current time, which ones they don't feel they're able to support, and which ones they feel that perhaps Cabinet should explore in further detail. So, to date, some members have actually undertaken over 8 hours of scrutiny looking at these proposals, and many have commented that they feel more engaged in the process this year than they have done in previous years. So the following are supported by the majority of scrutiny members, although one member felt unable to support any of the proposals put forward and wanted that noted. So the majority of savings proposed are supported, although a small number have been qualified with caveats about timings or scale. So some of them they'd like brought forward into next year, and some of them they'd like dropped back. Some of them they don't support the full savings measure, but they'd like to see a percentage of that cut. But all that is captured for you. A small number, approximately 30 out of over 200, are not supported at the current time, and 6 have been deferred for Cabinet to seek further information as scrutiny members felt they weren't sufficiently well explained to understand the impact on staff or citizens or the nature of the saving. Scrutiny committees have also made 6 suggestions for alternative areas to be explored. They're focusing mainly on working more in collaboration or partnership both internally and externally, and investigating alternative methods of service delivery. Thank you.
I mean, it was a much better process than we've had before in scrutiny, and we ought to recognise the role Lynn and her team played in constructing that, but also the role played by chief officers and their senior staff in fielding 8 hours of scrutiny questions, and it really was quite in depth. So we do recognise, you know, the role that everyone has played in trying to inform and whatever. So what we've got is a set of measures. I mean, I think all of scrutiny are hoping it's going to be slightly better. You know, they approached it very responsibly in accepting the measures, but if 10% isn't required, they'll be expecting some paring back on those. But if our overall assumptions are right, then for the first time we do have something to work with here to try and craft not just a proposal for 16-17, but a financial plan for 17-18 and 18-19. And obviously the further out you go, the less firm it gets. But I think that's a really positive position that both the leadership have got themselves into, and then with scrutiny review. In terms of finishing just off the report before we open it up for questions, there are a number of risks. The assumption around pay is the biggest risk. We've taken it down to 1% based on what the Chancellor said, but any upward pressure on pay will cause us some issues. Obviously, failure to achieve the corporate proposals that we've outlined. They're going to be difficult, but I think they're designed to protect the impact on frontline service provision, so therefore we've got to drive at them hard. We don't know where Welsh Government are going to go on the grant allocations, and particularly, there's talk of the outcome agreement grant going in. Let's hope it goes in and there's no like-for-like sort of problems in how it gets badged, because we all spend that in our base budget allocations. There's a next steps part of the report, provisional settlement next week, Cabinet consideration now of the overall position between now and January. I'm going to be bringing the savings package back hopefully on the 19th of January for you to at least agree those things that everyone is now agreed on within the funding envelope we've got. Finalise the 3 priorities. Then we've got to do the Equalities Impact Assessment, which will be starting now with all the proposals. And then we've obviously got to put it through the lens of the well-being of future generations considerations before all of this goes to Council on the 1st of March. For agreement. And now I liken it to, I've got a jigsaw, I've got a lot of pieces, I don't quite know the picture yet, but now I've got to try and create the picture.
Well done, thank you both for excellent presentation. Whether people agree or don't agree with the process, one thing is certain, this is an excellent process, and that officers at all levels and cabinet members at all levels have had a huge involvement in this. There's a learning process going on here which we should be proud of, and the involvement of the Scrutiny Committee as well is first class. Right then, Anthony Hunt.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you to Nigel, officers both in his team and chief officers across the Council for the work they've done on this. I'd also like to thank Cabinet members who've sat through looking at savings proposals in great detail for hour upon hour, showing that we really do take our job seriously in the tough times that we face. And of course we'll continue to do that as we reach further decisions coming through. I'd also like to thank Lynn, her team, and all the scrutiny members who attended the session. We've tried to improve the process each year, building on sort of new things that we've done each year to make the process both more robust and constructive, to try and look to the medium term, not just the short term. And I'm glad that members have taken that on board and acted accordingly. The sessions that I attended were lively, they were open, they were real discussions and not just set-piece speeches from different people. And I, genuinely, I think as a Cabinet we want that to be part of a proper dialogue. We can't sit here and claim that tough choices can be avoided, but we can try and approach them in the right way. And I think that's been done. I'm glad that members in the scrutiny sessions, with one exception, have engaged in a responsible way, rather than burying their heads in the sand and looking for other people to make tough choices. This is a job that we've all got in local government, whether we like it or not. None of us got into local government to make choices like this, but as long as there's a UK government doing what this UK government's doing, there's going to be tough choices to be made, and it would be irresponsible of us to run away from our responsibilities. I think we're right to look at the budget over 3 years, to look to the medium term, and to look to try and prioritise in line with some of the emerging priorities that are forming in our Corporate Plan 3, which will start next year, and which we'll talk a lot more about, I'm sure, in Cabinet and Council going forward. These are the impacts of austerity on the ground level, and I've called many times for national politicians, especially the Chancellor, to maybe study a bit more the impact of their decisions on frontline services on the ground, and I'll continue to do that today. But as I say, it's difficult, but we've got to do our job, both for those who we employ, the staff who rely on us to set a responsible budget, and also for the service users who would be bereft if their services were just cut from underneath them by people from outside. So the cuts, whatever savings that we have to make, I hope people recognise the message that this isn't a result of the choices of anyone in any town hall across the country, both in Torvine and elsewhere, because of course we've got to remember, in many times the debate locally sometimes just centres on what's happening locally. This is being replicated 22 times throughout Wales and several hundred times throughout the rest of Britain, as councillors have impossible decisions to make between services that we all value. I have to mention in this context the remarkable letter sent from the Prime Minister, no less, to the leader of his council, that's Conservative-run Oxfordshire Council, expressing surprise that they're having to make cuts when his government have cut the funding to that council by about £72 million. The Prime Minister may think that's a slight cut. I think anyone who's got a vague grasp of maths or a vague understanding of local services will think rather differently. I'd also like to say that in recognition of many of the people who I've spoken to around the borough as part of the sort of consultation and engagement exercise going on about this, that we do understand that we have to cut our cloth accordingly as councillors ourselves. Labour group councillors in this authority and in many authorities throughout Wales have refused to take a pay rise throughout this entire term in recognition of the sacrifices being made by our staff who've had real terms pay cuts repeatedly, and also in recognition of the difficult situation facing local services. One plea that I would make to the Welsh Government: we recognise they're in a difficult situation thanks to cuts coming from above them, but the settlement that Nigel has explained does present an opportunity for us to work together with the Welsh Government to try and protect social care, to avoid an English situation where early intervention and preventative services and social care are collapsing and presenting the NHS with unmanageable demand problems. We all support the NHS and we all want to back the NHS, but you will only properly support the NHS if you invest properly in the social care services that stop demand spiralling in the NHS. So that's a plea that we'll make to the Welsh Government as local authorities throughout Wales, and it's something that I've been speaking to ministers about, and I know the leader has too. And in that context, I think it's important perhaps to set out our aims, and that they need to be higher than just being a little bit better than England. Local services are on the verge of collapse in many places in England. The situation is under real strain because of repeated massive cuts to local government that seem likely to continue up until 2020 at least. We disagree fundamentally with that austerity programme and the impact it's having on local services in England, but we really need to aim in Wales as much as we can to be not just a little bit better than that, but to have an alternative vision for local services and for properly funding and protecting them. In that context, I look forward to the provisional settlement next week. The spending review from the Shadow Chancellor has pushed everything back, and that's disappointing in a context in which we're told to plan ahead, to think about the medium term, and then we get our settlements later and later as local councils each year. And I think that's unhelpful, but it's a job that we've still been getting on with in the absence of proper information from the UK government. The corporate measures that Nigel talked about today are very important because they may seem dry in themselves, but they're the way that we try and reduce the impact on the frontline services. The more that we can save as a central organisation, the more that we can save corporately by being more efficient, by doing things innovatively, by changing the way we work, the less frontline services have to save. In saying that, I will just make one caveat. The other thing that the Prime Minister's letter exposed somewhat is the lack of understanding about how local government works. He talked in his letter about frontline services and about the back office, as if the back office was this huge morass that takes most of our money up. Almost all of our money as a council is spent on frontline services in one way or another, and I would challenge the Prime Minister to name what he thinks these back office services are that don't have benefit to the public. I'll just use one example. You may say that a planning officer was a back office function, but if you, for example, need to help your elderly and frail grandparents move into house with you, and you need to have an extension in order for them to do that and make adaptations, suddenly those planning officers who you look to make a quick and timely decision so that you can get on with that project become pretty frontline and pretty important to you. And I would challenge the Prime Minister and those national politicians who talk about back office functions to be a bit less glib about using that term and to recognise a bit more the intricacies and the importance of what many of our staff do serving the public. I hope that the corporate measures that we've explained today will mean, as Nigel said, that we won't have to take many of the savings measures that we've described, but I think it was right to give members a choice so they could make real decisions rather than to give them a fait accompli. And I hope that we can move forward now as we move towards decisions in January and beyond, where we really drill down into some of those savings and we look at what we can do to get the best possible result for the people that we serve. So I thank Nigel again for his report, and I'd recommend supporting it.
Well done, Anthony. Superb analysis. Right then, any other members? John?
Just a comment to Lynn, if I may, Chairman. Presumably, in the normal way, you will now inform the department and the executive members of each department on the scrutiny's recommendations and comments, so we can sort of analyse it and go through it and come back with our recommendations.
Yeah, the formal recommendations have been submitted to Councillor Hunt as Executive Member for Resources, and I'm sure he'll disseminate them then to the relevant service areas.
Right, anybody else? If not, then thank you again, both of you and Anthony. All in favour of the recommendation, show. Thank you. Now then, we're on to item 8, which is the 21st Century Schools, and this is Dermot and John. Tush.
Thank you, Leader. The purpose of this report is obviously to seek approval to submit the business case to Welsh Government, the outline business case which is attached in your appendices for the replacement of Crossy School. Obviously, we've been here before in terms of going through this process. We're now at the point in 21st Century Schools where we've come round to Crossy Ceiliog, and there are some key points I just want to make sure that the committee the Cabinet are really focused on in terms of this particular paper. The current cost envelope for this build for the school remains at the original amount that was discussed previously, which is £36 million for an 11 to 18 build. Clearly, we've brought other papers through Cabinet since then, and the proposal that you're looking at today is to go forward with a new build for Crossy Ceiliog School for 11 to 16 at 1,200 places. Now, the paper goes on to discuss, in terms of the consultation process, that we will make sure that the other consultations around the removal of Post-16 and the development of Post-16 Centre coincide with the consultation process for this paper that we're taking through today. And there is facility there that, if we needs be, that we will look at 11 to 18 build on the site. So this is not precluding or preempting the outcome of any other consultation that we've already committed to. So I think those are really important points that we look at. 1,200 is important because that's lower than the current standard number for the school, but that's based on the capacity, on the demand for places in school at the moment. And one of the things that we've had experience of from Welsh Government in other proposals is where those places, if Welsh Government don't feel that we've got the capacity, the demand there, they won't allow us to proceed with building in effect what they might refer to as excess places, which is why we're looking at 1,200. So the format of the paper is, as we've been through in a number of instances before, goes through the structure of the outline business case, which is attached, talks about the consultation process in section 5.9 and following, which obviously we can go through in detail later in questions, but basically make sure that we don't preempt the outcome of any of the other consultations that we've already committed to, as I've already said, and that we'll be ready to go forward to the final business case to allow us to have the school ready for completion in September 19, which is what we're aiming for. So I think the paper is quite self-explanatory. The policy impact assessment is there also for you to scrutinise. The risks clearly for Crossy-Keeliog, if members haven't been to the school, it's in urgent need of some significant work. So the risk we've put there really is that if we don't get a solution for Crossy-Keeliog quite quickly, the fabric of the school is such that we've got significant concerns about its capacity to continue to function. So no action really, from our point of view, really isn't an option. And the recommendations are there, Leader, that we proceed.
Thank you for that.
Could John just add to...
John, do you want to?
Can I just add something that's not drawn out in the report and should have been, so apologies for that. It is in the business case itself. The increase in building work that's taking place in Wales at the moment is having an inflationary pressure on prices. So it's very clear in the business case that we need to do more market testing during the next phase of development of the business case to make sure that we can deliver for the price that we're talking about. We saw some pressure on the 3 primary schools, and we just need to be clear. But this process allows you to do that. It's an iterative process that allows you to make sure at each stage that what you're saying is deliverable.
John and Dermot. David Yole.
Not a lot to add. I think the report is, if you take the time to read through it, it's very detailed in its explanation of the process. I think what Dermot and John, but particularly Dermot, has said to you this morning is clear enough. The choices are there. The only fly in the ointment, if that's an appropriate term, is that the funding for and certainly the green light for the issue at Crossy-Keeliog is in some ways, in some significant ways, predicated on the success or otherwise of the post-16 institution getting the green light. We all know that we've gone past the first stage in that the strategic outline case has been passed, so it moves on to the outline business case. Should that fall, however, we're all optimistic that that won't be the case, but should it fall, then clearly that has an impact on what happens at Crossy-Keeliog, because there will be a need to create the space for the post-16 situation. So instead of an 11 to 16, it would be an 11 to 18 with the implications that suggests. But we are forever optimistic in Pearl House, and we believe that the two projects can coexist in the way that we envisage their coexistence, and that is the post-16 will go ahead, and Crossy-Keeliog will have an 11 to 16 institution. I was at Crossy-Keeliog yesterday, and I can vouch for the fact that, because I had a long conversation with the head, the school was opened in 1959, so that makes it 56 years old, and it's beginning to show signs of it being 56 years old. At the moment it is still in a durable situation, but how long that can continue is another matter. There is a strong case for a new build, and I think this particular report sets out how that strategically, financially and socially would be a good thing. So I commend it, and I hope everybody else will vote for it.
Thank you for that, Dave. Any other comments? No other comments? All right then, please show. Thanks for that. Thank you, Dermot and John. Now then on to item 9, which is the Heads of the Valleys Organic Project. This is... come on, Donna. Yeah, you okay? Right, over to you, Donna.
Morning, members. I'm hoping you've got a real sense of déjà vu with me being sat in front of you this morning. I've been to you twice this year with a report around signing inter-authority agreements and outline business cases for our residual waste, which is our black bin waste. This report concerns food waste, so it's the treatment and disposal of our food waste. Effectively, we want to have a long-term contract. We're looking at this contract in collaboration with Blaen y Gwent and Monmouth councils. The other reason that you're going to have déjà vu is because you've already signed this off. You'd already signed it off back in 2009 and 2010 as a cabinet. That was to procure a long-term organic contract at that stage. That went all the way through to final bidder part of the process, and then unfortunately the last two bidders withdrew, as you'll recall, because a report was brought to you to explain that to you. So this report is seeking your endorsement and your agreement, approval, to agree an outline business case, which is what we will submit to Welsh Government for them to approve to give us the funding to run the procurement, and also an inter-authority agreement, which is the legally binding contract that we will then have with Blaen y Gwent and also Monmouth to go out and procure a long-term food waste contract. So, as part of the report, you've got a copy of the outline business case and also the inter-authority agreement. It's the same documents that you previously signed. What's changed are the people who were party to that agreement, because it was originally Blaen y Gwent, Torfaen and Caerphilly. It is now Blaen y Gwent, Torfaen and Monmouth. So that's changed. We've also changed the procurement route because we're looking to make it a lot simpler this time and easier to follow. And consequently, there's been some changes to the tonnages that we expect to put out to market, and also the fact that this is just food and not green waste as well. But apart from that, the documents are exactly the same as the ones that you'd signed previously. In terms of, and I've explained all that, that's all been explained in section 5 of the report. And the inter-authority agreement is the same. As with all of these procurements, you'll agree the inter-authority agreement to go into the procurement. Once we've gotten to the end of that procurement and we're ready to award contract, I'll come back to another report seeking agreement to inter-authority 2, which is how we then run that long-term contract going forward. And this will be for 20 years. It's a 15-year contract with a 5-year extension. The procurement we anticipate will take between 12 and 18 months because we're going through a simpler procurement route. In terms of policy impact assessment in section 7, there's only high positive impacts, which are outlined there, related to financial savings, stability and helping us meet our recycling targets. The risks are outlined for you in section 8. The only two real risks that we've highlighted is that when we go out to market, we've currently got an interim arrangement agreement. If we go out to market, we don't know what we're going to get in terms of gate fee. It could be the same or more than what we've got now, although we anticipate a saving. And the second is that at the moment we're anticipating that this procurement, there will be no financial contribution required from any of the authorities towards this procurement. That could change depending on Welsh Government's stance, but at the moment we're anticipating no financial cost at all. The only cost to the authorities is the actual officers involved in the procurement itself. Within the inter-authority agreement, you'll see that there is a governance structure set out, which is the same governance structure that we've always had. So just to remind you, you've got a project team of technical officers who were supported by external technical support. You've got a project board, which comprises directors and senior officers from all authorities involved. And then supporting that again, you've got a joint committee of elected members. And the two elected members on our from this authority is Councillor Cunningham and also Councillor Hunt, representing neighbourhood services and resources respectively. So I'll move straight to the recommendation then, Cabinet, and that is that you approve the outline business case and the inter-authority agreement, which are attached to this report, that you approve that we proceed with that procurement on the basis of the affordability which has been outlined and has been through, that you delegate authority to agree and finalise the detailed terms of the inter-authority agreement to the Chief Officer of Neighbourhood Services and Planning and Public Protection, and that you delegate authority not otherwise covered by the inter-authority agreement or our existing scheme of delegation as outlined within the report. And the report also says that in terms of the joint committee, we will have a slight change to the actual committee that's shown in our constitution because of the change of membership.
Right, thanks for that, Dana. John?
Yeah, nothing to add to that, really, Chairman, just to say that we've been through this ad nauseum, I think, in previous years, where unfortunately we had to go back to the drawing board on it. We've done that now. There's some minor tweaks where we've included Monmouth now as part of our inter-authority agreement, and with that in mind, I think that we've got a good case to put forward, and hopefully we'll get some recompense from the Welsh Assembly if they to help us with this process. We don't know that yet, of course. So I would move the report.
Thanks for that. Any other members want to make a comment? If not, then please show the recommendation. Thanks very much. Thank you, Donna. The next item is action for pollinators. We're two good friends coming down here. Right. When you're ready.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. It's a progress report that we brought to Cabinet today within the context of an action plan that was previously agreed at the 2014 Cabinet meeting, supported and required under the duties within the NERC Act, the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006. And so the actions that were agreed are there in 4.4. So in terms of progress, there are a number of actions that have been taken, quite a lot of progress made actually, I think. We've implemented wildflower verges across the main spine of the authority during 2013-14 and 14-15, and meadowland areas as well. There have been a few slight difficulties with public engagement in some of these, but the majority, I think, has been well supported. And indeed, I think the wildflower verges last year received tremendous public support, and I think made a big difference to the well-being of communities and give a positivity to the area. And you know, you remember the Facebook issues we had when the vandalism occurred, and I think the public were well engaged with that. Over the last 2 years, we also secured £562,000 in relation to the Nature Fund across two projects, one focused on the uplands, which included the development of a plan for the uplands to include habitat management, combating antisocial behaviour, and general support for rural economy there. And I think the key factor of that is that this has a big impact on reducing the impact of climate change through actions in the upland. In terms of the other Nature Fund project, the Pollinators for Life project, again there's an action plan there now for the future that will, I think, help us secure additional funding for delivering pollinator actions in the future, hopefully through the Rural Development Fund. A few other bits and pieces on there in relation to activity on the ground, also how we're trying to use the planning process to create biodiversity mitigation opportunities where there's a loss relating to development. Reference to the urban buzz there, where there's some funding allocated, and we hope to secure even more funding in relation to that over the next few months. So in terms of moving forward, the agreement that we were hoping that we could secure today is to continue the wildflower verges again in 2016 with a total cost of £47,000, most of which is delivered through in-house staff. We've got £11,000 secured through the Welsh Government fund in there, and we'll endeavour to secure the rest through other sources, but if not, we'd ask that the Council underwrite the shortfall there. Through the funds within neighbourhood services, and we'd also be looking for agreement that we go forward and seek funding to deliver the two plans developed through the Nature Fund project, the Uplands plan and the Pollinator Action Plan. We hope to do that through the Rural Development Grant. Is there anything you needed to add, Steve, being the ecology expert?
The only thing, just to reiterate what Andrew said, I think the Pollinators Action Plan, which was agreed by Council in 2014, has been quite a move forward for the local authority. And as Andrew mentioned in the report, the incident we had on Cumbrae Drive that was vandalised, the response from the members of the public was really high, and was a bit of a litmus test, really, as to how the members of the public viewed our approach to pollinators. So, just to reiterate, it's been quite a success, And I know there's a cost involved, but as long as we keep this going, and in the light of new legislation, the Wellbeing legislation and the forthcoming Environment Act, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Thanks for that. Well, my view is that the pollinator project was hugely successful, and that was witnessed by emails and letters and telephone calls and different agencies and organisations and individuals that wrote in about it. I think it's one or two I've come across that disagreed with it for reasons best known to themselves. At that time it was funded externally, but I think our intention as a council is to try and keep that going. It ought to be pointed out that all local authorities. I mean, if you went to Monmouth through Chepstow and seen some of those verges, and you went to Caerphilly and you went to Newport and various other places, it really is exceptional. And I hope that we can continue with it for as long as we can. So I think the public in Torwine consider it to be a success and would welcome a continuation of it. I know that particularly members have come forward and said how pleased their people were with your exercise. So congratulations to the team that put it together, and all the success in the future. Any other members now? Let me bring in Anthony. Let me bring in John first.
Just to comment on that, because I did have a discussion with Steve earlier on, that there were obviously some problems that we did confront by doing these corridors, because there was a couple of areas on the wildlife corridor up through the borough that, for some reason or other, and I don't know whether we've identified the reason, would not take the flowers. There was something wrong with the soil. So there was a couple of areas which we will address that. I'll probably point it somewhere else. And there was a couple of areas on our meadowland which raised some issues where they were a bit too high profile to neighbours. And we've addressed some of them through mitigation measures. Obviously we lose out slightly on that, but that's areas that we will look at if we have any reoccurrence of that. But apart from that, everything else was good. The other challenge, of course, is that Andrew have taken on board is obtaining the finance to do the job, and he's well underway with that, I understand. Good.
No, very much like to support it. It's something that looks good and also is good for the environment, so it seems like a good sort of win-win on that situation. And it's also good to see that we got some, sort of praise as councils for taking the action to do it. A lot of the costs have been explained, but as I understand it, there's also a saving that comes from not having to mow areas that are put out for pollinators. Can we quantify that and maybe sort of look to get some expression of that down so that we can sort of show that this doesn't just cost, it also saves the council money if the place in the right place, because we don't have to continually mow them.
And if I might do that, because that was part of our mitigation for last year, I think, within our budget measures. So that figure should be available somewhere around that we can let members know.
Gwynaira, I know that people were very pleased with the whole exercise.
Absolutely. I think I was just going to say, I think it was outlined by the fact that you showed the picture at the last council, and I said, this says it all, doesn't it? Absolutely brought a lot of colour into people's lives. It was wonderful, so thanks very much. Yes, there was a few hiccups, especially in my ward, but you're addressing those, and I can't ask for more than that. But on the whole, it was an absolutely wonderful scheme, and I just support continuing it.
Good.
Forget also, it's not just how they look, it's what we've achieved in relation to the attraction of the pollinators. And Steve could tell you much more about the varieties, etc., that we've attracted because of it.
Do you want to make a couple of comments, Steve?
Yeah, the only thing I'd say on that, following on, it was a package of measures that was agreed last year. It wasn't just the wildflower corridor, it was the meadowland area, and if you know anything about the biology of pollinators, they don't just need flowers to collect the pollen from, they need nesting sites, and it was always a package that we would look at, seeding where we could, but also amending the grass cutting regime at selected sites where we were able to do that. And I take on board that there were issues with some of the meadowland areas, and as has been mentioned, we are trying to address those, and we are always sort of open to trying to resolve any issues that might occur as a result of those meadowland areas.
Right, thanks for that. Anybody else, or can we take the vote now then? Again, well done to the whole department and everybody that was involved. We see the recommendation show, please. Thank you. We're on now to item 11, which is the proposed disposal of 4 schools, and this is Victor. When you're ready, Victor.
Good morning. The background to this report is a happy one, which is that the council is in the process of constructing 3 new primary schools within the borough. The first of those, Blenheim Primary School, is being constructed on the existing site, but not utilizing the entire site, so there will be some land that won't be required by the school. The second school is Grantanham Primary School, which is being constructed on the Grantanham Comps site, leaving the entire current site no longer required for education purposes. And then the third is the ASCO Panteg, which currently occupies 2 sites, and again, those won't be required for education purposes. So the report is to seek approval to progress the eventual disposal of the 4 sites, the 3 schools and part of the Blenheim Primary School. There are plans attached to, I don't know if they're actually on the plans attached to the report showing the extent of land that we are looking at. But the recommendation of the report that the extent of land at each school site, as shown on the respective plans, be declared surplus to council requirements. And secondly, that legal and asset management be authorized to progress the disposal of each of those sites on the understanding that none of them will progress up to completion until the new schools have successfully and completely relocated to their new premises. And finally, that further reports be brought to Cabinet as and when marketing has occurred, except if the price level being recommended ordinarily falls within the remit of the Deputy Leader as Executive Member for Resources and Governance. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Victor. Would you any comments?
Just one.
Okay.
Thank you. Got your hand on the button, Leader. Just one small comment. This might, and I'm sure it does, bring tears to the eyes of people like Nigel and Anthony. But I think Torvine is, if not unique, then it's amongst a very, very small cohort of local authorities that transfer the proceeds from sale of ex-school land property back into the education budget as opposed to the central pot. And that augurs well for our schools service, that's for sure. And I think it's worth comment on that because I suspect not many people realise that. Certainly members of the public should know that the health of the education service, in spite of the furore, the heat around school closures and the knock-on effects of these, is that there is that one prize at the end of it, and that the money coming from the sale of this land that Victor's just outlined to us, any proceeds come back into, by and large, come back into the education pot, and that augurs well for us going forward.
Right, thanks for that, Dave. Any other comments? See the recommendations there on 297. All agreed? Thanks for that. On now to item 12, which is the disposal of Unit 280 Cork Industrial Estate. You want to continue, Victor?
Thank you, Leader. At Cork Industrial Estate, the council owns 3 industrial units side by side. One of the tenants at the industrial estate has made an offer to acquire their property that they occupy for £400,000. The rent that is payable on the unit currently is £46,000. The lease is for 15 years, ends in 2019, so it's got 4 years left to run. There isn't a pressing asset management reason for the disposal, but this is potentially a windfall for the council, 400,000, which has been based on an independent valuation followed by negotiations. So it's really for Cabinet to consider whether this is an offer worth accepting, and the recommendation is that the offer be accepted that the Unit 2A be declared surplus to council requirements, and then any other matters arising during the process of negotiating detailed terms be delegated for decision to the Deputy Leader acting as the Executive Portfolio Holder for Resources and Governance. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that explanation. Any members got any comments, recommendations on 311? All agreed, Joe? Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Victor. We're on now to item 13, which is the annual complaints report, and this is Lynn Williams. Is it Lynn Williams? No, sorry, apologize.
Thank you, Leader. Okay.
Carry on.
The reason for the report is to update Cabinet with the annual complaints performance for social care complaints and corporate complaints. This does not include code of conduct complaints. These go through the Ethics and Standards Committee. The key messages are that for the last financial year, the complaints decreased by 40%. Whilst obviously this is a very good achievement, there were no major service changes during that period which impacted on residents. However, that trend has continued through the current financial year as well. The process was audited by internal audit in August of this year. It was judged as sound and there were no recommendations, even though we were beneath the target of 96%, which is the compliance rate of responding to complaints within the agreed time frame. During the last reported period of July to September, I'm pleased to announce that this was 100% for the first time, so that's quite a good achievement. The report has been taken to the leadership team and it was taken to scrutiny this year to discuss lessons learned from the complaints. We're actually trying to go forward now and work more with service areas to look at the bigger picture to see if we can learn from customer contact to try and prevent complaints happening in the first place. And I'll be working with Lynn Williams and Gareth regarding that, Gareth Phillips, to look if we can look at more intelligence and work closely with service areas regarding that. So the recommendations really are just for Cabinet to note the progress made during the year, and that we're learning from lessons learned, service improvements are delivered, so that reoccurrences of the complaints are minimised, and that our proposals to support service areas and use their customer contact information to see if we can be more proactive in preventing complaints in the first place. Thank you.
Right, thanks for the report. Any comments by members? If not, yes, Lewis?
Whilst I fully appreciate, all the hard work that goes into this and the reduction in actual formal complaints, I've had some concerns from quite a lot of elderly people. It's access when they come to customer care. There doesn't seem to be any record of they call to express a concern, because I know the difference between a concern and a complaint, and they can't seem to get any registration or whatever of their complaints, of their concerns, and there's been quite a few in the Trevethin Pennygarn ward. People have come to me that they've come in, expressed some concern, and then there's been no record of them actually attending. Additional to that, there's been quite a number of people who have hung up on the telephone because they've been waiting and couldn't get no access. So I'd be grateful if that, and I fully understand the problem with sickness and absenteeism. You've got a small team to deal with the public up front, and I fully understand, when you've got a shortage of staff, but it really needs looking at somehow, that if somebody comes in with an expression of concern and they speak to somebody, that they ought to have like a counterfile or something to say that they have been in there, because it seems that people are coming in and leaving, and that they've come back then about a fortnight later with exactly the same concern. Thanks.
If you've got any examples of those, I'll look into those for you. There are new people starting in customer services today, so that there will be more people available to answer the telephone. Obviously, we're trying to promote more people to contact us electronically. So if more people are contacting us electronically, that frees up the telephones for the people that do not have the ability to contact us with the electronic services as well. But if you've got any cases that you would like me to look into, I'd be happy to do that with you. And going forward, we're actually using all of the information that we capture. That's what we're trying to analyse at the moment, to see if we can look at those areas prior to them becoming a complaint.
Richard Clark.
Can I just come in on that point? We recognise the report, and I think in terms of formal complaints, I think it's a grand job, and the 100% that you referred to is very important. Lewis made the point that he understands the difference between complaints and concerns. I think what might be beneficial for members is a member seminar that explains that process. I remember a number of years ago you did one with Lisa Dando Alice. If that could come into being, for example, when you go to the police, you have a log number. When Mrs. Jones or Mr. Smith comes in and makes a complaint, not your area, formal complaint, a concern that the bin hasn't been emptied or something like that, and they could be given a number by customer care or receive an electronic receipt, a number, and if then something hasn't been actioned, they can follow up and say, well, I've got a reference number here. Whoever's dealing with it can look at it and say, well, actually, Mr. Smith, on the 12th of whatever date, this happened, etc., etc. So in your work of going right to the front of the queue at the beginning and try and preempt things going into formal complaints, perhaps if some work and some explanation to members is given by way of a member seminar, I think that might be very helpful. But in terms of the report and the successes of your service, I commend you and congratulate you for your hard work.
If I could just add there, the people that contact us electronically, when they have the automatic receipt, there is a unique reference number on that. And when people come into customer care, or by telephone or in person, when that record of that visit is created, that creates a unique reference as well. So we are able to, okay, I can look into that. Okay, thank you.
All right, any other members? John?
Just a comment that Lewis reminded me of, actually. Where in your report is it reflected about the complaints about the telephone system? Because don't tell me they don't have any, because I have dozens and dozens and dozens of complaints about the telephone system. That people just how many abandoned calls you have because of it? That people just cannot get through to Torvine County Borough Council. Full stop. And it's all right for officers to try and defend that. It isn't working, and something's got to be done about it. So I'm just wondering how many complaints you have about the system.
During the last financial year, prior to 14-15, when the telephone system was first introduced, if people couldn't get through on the telephones, they were calling me because they wanted to make a complaint. Obviously, the report only reflects the people that have actually taken the time to complain about that. So whilst I agree that the performance does need improving, and we've acknowledged that, but formal complaints that were reflected in the report were fewer during the last financial year. So obviously this report doesn't cover the current period. So, that could be higher. But like I said, there's new people starting today, so hopefully overall it will be a reduced picture going throughout the year as well.
Yeah, because an interesting point there would demonstrate that was how many abandoned calls you actually have now, because I understand you do record that.
Yeah, the abandoned calls are recorded, but obviously they weren't. This report was just about the corporate complaints, so I don't hold that information.
Right. Any other members?
Yep. So.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Can I just come in? It is difficult, and over a number of years now there have been problems, but I think we're trying to sort those problems out. Some of the problems relate to when people call in customer care, they're then put through to the departments, and the delay is there. And sometimes they get cut off, and we apologise for that. But there is a breakdown of communication somewhere. We have to look at that, but I don't think it can be all said it's customer care fault. And we're not in the blame game here. We're trying to sort out a difficult problem for our residents in Torvine. But I do think that we need to differentiate where the calls are coming or going to, and that seems to be where the problems lie.
Yeah, just to add something to Grenada's. I understand the frustration of people using a telephone system. I presume the telephone system that John is referring to is the automated telephone system. What we need to do, it might very well be that that isn't working as efficiently as it could. It might very well be that the case is that communications generally can be improved. Everybody would want efficiency year on year on year and to make things better year on year on year. But the reason the automated telephone system was introduced in the first instance was to cope with the huge volume of traffic in that sense against a backdrop of significant reductions in the staff in customer care. And therein lies the tale, because under the old system with the reduced numbers of staff, the abandoned call rate and indeed complaints as well, as I understand it, were significantly high. One of the issues with the automated telephone system, yes, some people still abandon the calls because of either impatience or because they just happen to be at the end of a queue or whatever. But I would be interested to know what the compare and contrast situation is between the current automated telephone system in terms of trying to communicate and contact the council and the old system. And my guess is that it is probably more efficient and the abandon rates are probably less now. That isn't to say that they are acceptable. We need to be honing up on this, but I don't think it's necessarily the case that this is worse now than it ever has been, because I don't think that is the case. But I would be interested in a comparison to be made there.
I think we've had a decent discussion on that. I sense a seminar coming on, and I think that that's what we're. So I think we should move the recommendations.
You know, Dave have introduced some new information as regards the new telephone system as regards the old telephone system. Now, is there any way that the new telephone system tracks and records the number of abandoned calls? Because if it does, you know, then we need to be ringing those people and finding out why they abandoned the call.
Let's look, we can go on here all day. You've got the report in front of you, you see the recommendations. I'm suggesting we have a seminar on this so that members are better informed and can understand and explain to the residents, as well as us finding a mechanism to tell the residents what the process is.
For seminars.
I move the recommendations, do we agree? Yeah. Thanks so much for that. Next item is item 14, which is council staff evaluation pilot and lessons learned. This is Richard Edmonds. Over to you, Rich.
Thank you, Leader. Shame I wasn't here for the last item, but I'll have a chance to catch up with Cabinet members after the session, if that would be helpful. This report highlights the fact that self-evaluation, which is a term that we're hearing a lot more around local government, is a very, very important aspect of governance, particularly governance of an organisation like ours. Essentially, it provides a process by which the organisation can work out what it's trying to achieve, reflect on how it's doing, collect evidence to demonstrate that progress, and also, perhaps more importantly, provide a proper base for future planning and development. A strong and robust self-evaluation process is increasingly being viewed by regulators as an indicator of a well-governed organisation. I think we've had some recent experiences with Estin that bear that out. Recognising the benefits of this, the Council embarked on the development of a local approach back in 2014. We engaged the WLGA, a gentleman called Doug Elliott, to come in and help us, had a wealth of experience in the field, and we worked with the organisation's senior managers task force to try and build something that would work on the ground in Torvine. The group collectively developed a template which is attached to Appendix 2, and we agreed that we'd run a pilot across the whole organisation to test this particular approach out and then refine it as required. The completed templates essentially would be service area position statements, so an at-a-glance view of how things were going within a service area, more importantly what was coming and what a service area was facing. The pilot study ran until June 2015. That was a little bit beyond the planned deadline, but that did enable us to build a pretty robust challenge process in. So having received the position statements from each of the service areas, they were then challenged by a small group of which Anthony, Councillor Clark, Allison and Jill Lewis formed a part. And that process has recently concluded. So what you've got in the report in front of you is the journey, the lessons that we've learned along the way, and there'll be some in there I'm sure will resonate with members. But more importantly, it's an assessment of what we need to do now. As this is such an important piece of governance, we've got to reflect on what we found through the pilot, refine the process so that going forward this becomes a key part of our service and financial planning processes as we move on. And I think I'll leave it there, Leader, if that's okay with you.
Good, thank you very much, Richard. Now then, Anthony.
Just very quickly, thank Richard for the report. I think it's key for us as members to recognise in this forum the importance of self-evaluation, which is honestly evaluating our strengths and weaknesses as an organisation, and then robustly challenging and supporting to aid improvement. It's correct, as Richard said, that the regulators find that very important, but I think that should almost be incidental to us, because we should find it important ourselves, so that we can do our best to improve the services that we provide. And if that happens to please the regulators, then that's all well and good, but it's something that's of value in itself and not just for that. I made the analogy before of it being a bit like a marathon runner. In order to improve your times, you have to have a realistic expectation of where you are. If you're a marathon runner who runs a marathon in 4 hours, it's pointless to think that you can do it in 2.5 hours and train accordingly. You'll set yourself up to fail. And that's much in the same way here. We need to, in order to move on, as we found with the process regarding Estin, you first have to have an honest assessment. As one of the people involved in the recovery board said, you need to know your data in order to improve your data. So I thank Councillor Clark in particular for the assistance with the challenge sessions. They were very robust. They weren't easy rides for anyone, but I think they were conducted in the right spirit of constructive questioning that's both robust and supportive, and that's the balance that we have to strike. While talking about that sort of challenge, I'd also like to thank all the Cabinet members who have participated in the recent CPA sessions. I think we're getting towards something there with those sessions. These are sessions for people who don't know, that are the whole sort of Cabinet and senior management team scrutinising key performance data from one department at a time. And those are really sort of robust way to look at where we need to improve performance and to try and drive improvement. So thank you to the Chief Officers and also to the Cabinet members who have played a part in that. I think that's important going forward.
Good, thanks for that, Anthony. Any other comments? Rich?
I can't really add much to what Anthony said. But for me, the couple of ones that I took part in, as well as perhaps I don't understand the marathon analogy, being the type of person that I am, but the important thing in the financial consequences that are waiting around the corner for it was the so what question, which I think upset a couple of people. But when we're doing all this activity, the question is, so what? What is the difference for the people of Torfaen? And I think that was a good place to stop and take stock. So I totally agree with everything that Anthony said, but as well as knowing where you want to go, you're actually sort of saying, are we doing the right things in the financial climate that we're currently in? I certainly found the couple that I did very interesting and caused me to take stock of myself.
Well done, thanks for that. Any other comments members want to make? If not, then you see the recommendations, please show. Thank you very much, Rich. Now then, we're moving into strange territory here, and I think I better bring Linda in, because I'm going to close down this council meeting formally.
No.
Oh, sorry, where are we going then?
Item 15.
Oh, I apologise, what we just done that. I'm in front of myself.
Frameworks.
Right, item 15. Apologise for that. Well then, let me just find this. Right then. Just one moment. All right. And here we are, Richard Edmonds again. I wondered why you didn't get up off that seat, Richard.
I thought it was due for early release then, Leader.
Right, over to you, Rich.
Okay, thanks. I think the sort of main messages from within this report are distilled in the key messages section in section 3, to be honest, members. You've heard from Nigel this morning that we're facing unprecedented budget reductions over the coming 3 years. In order to try and safeguard future service delivery as much as possible, we need to explore and implement a wide range of new ways of doing things. For us to be able to do that, particularly with the level of resource we now have available to drive change, we feel there'll be occasions where we will need to access additional business consultancy support to deliver the transformation we're trying to progress. And essentially what we would like permission from Cabinet to do is to go out to market to find a supplier that will be able to help us with this emerging programme, and to put them essentially into a framework agreement where we can ask them to help us as and when we surface certain pieces of work that we want to progress. So it's really about good business practice. We know we're going to need some help. We'd like to be able to go to a supplier that's on a framework that's been tested within the market as a means of being able to engage them more expediently than if we had to go out every single time we wanted to progress a piece of work. It's not an exclusive arrangement, so we'll have someone on the books, but it doesn't mean all the work will go to them necessarily. And at this stage, we're not in a position where we can articulate the level of spend, because each piece of work is going to be worked up as an individual business case and progressed with cabinets having full sight of that over the coming 2 to 3 years. So essentially, Leader, what I'm looking for is approval from Cabinet to go out to market and put someone on our books who we can then engage as and when key pieces of work should be progressed.
Thank you for that, Richard. Anthony, do you want to make some comments on this?
Quickly, none of us, wake up in the morning, wanting to spend money on such advice. However, the fact that we've made such big savings in senior management costs, about 25% in the last 5 years, combined with our desire to try and protect service areas themselves, and therefore the need to save more money from the sort of the centre of the organisation, and to need to drive sort of efficiencies and different ways of working, mean that this is something that's necessary if we're to try and protect those frontline services. There's obviously a benefit to some external analysis of the ways we work and some external advice into how we could do things differently or do things better, and I think this will deliver that. And I'd just emphasise the last point that Richard made in that statement, in that this is just a framework, and specific areas of spend will come back to us for agreement as and when they're necessary. But I think if we're to try and make those corporate savings that we talked about in item 7, and therefore protect service areas from needing to save 10% or more a year, this is a necessary thing.
Good. Any other comments? Well, you see the recommendation. We might well have to come back to this at some stage, but you see the recommendation there. All show, please. Thanks for that. Now then, when I started earlier on, I was in front of myself then. We're in an unusual set of circumstances now. I'll call Linda in to explain it, because we're going to shut this council down and open a new one within the next 2 or 3 minutes. Linda, do you want to explain it?
Yes, sorry, Leader. After we sent out the agenda for the Cabinet meeting that you've just had, we were alerted to a matter that actually needed a Cabinet decision and couldn't wait until the next one in January. So we thought in these particular circumstances the most efficient way was to end the meeting on the set agenda, but we are able to convene a meeting at shorter notice for this particular item. And of course the most time efficient way is for you to hold it immediately after your standard meeting. So that's how it's come about, Leaders. So it seems somewhat cumbersome, but it does tick all the right boxes procedurally.
Right, I understand that. We don't do nothing illegal. So can I just inform the people in charge of the video that this council is now closed, and we'll give it 2 or 3 minutes and we'll open it back up.